Picture this. You're standing on a cliff in southern Spain, looking out at nothing. No ocean. Just a sheer drop of over 600 feet down into a valley where the Mediterranean Sea used to be. Below you, farms stretch out across a plain the size of France. Highways and railroads connect Europe to Africa on dry land. And looming behind you is a wall of concrete 21 miles long, holding back the entire Atlantic Ocean. This isn't science fiction. This was a real, seriously funded, seriously debated engineering proposal, one that came terrifyingly close to becoming the defining megaproject of the 20th century. It was called Atlantropa, and today we're draining the Mediterranean Sea. Before we dive in, and trust me, this one gets darker and stranger than you'd ever expect, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. If the idea of an engineer trying to physically redraw the map of two continents sounds insane to you, you are exactly who this channel is for. We dig up the mega projects history tried to forget, the ones too big, too strange, or too dangerous to ever get built. Subscribe now, because by the end of this video, you're going to look at the Mediterranean completely differently. Now, let's go back to 1927. Europe, just 9 years after the First World War, is a continent in crisis. Economies are wrecked. Millions are unemployed. Empires have collapsed. Borders have been redrawn in blood, and a quiet panic is setting in. Europe is running out of room, running out of resources, and running out of confidence in its own future. Across the Atlantic, America is roaring. Out east, a new Pan-Asia is rising. And one Munich architect, a man named Hermann Zorgel, becomes convinced that Europe is about to be left behind forever, unless something radical happens. Zorgel isn't a politician. He isn't a general. He's an architect with a head full of numbers and a flair for the dramatic. And then he stumbles across a fact that changes everything. Every single second, roughly 88,000 cubic meters of water pour out of the Atlantic Ocean and into the Mediterranean Sea through the narrow Strait of Gibraltar. That's the equivalent of something like a dozen Niagara Falls, non-stop, day and night, forever. The Mediterranean, it turns out, loses more water to evaporation than its rivers put back in. The only reason it isn't shrinking right now is that the Atlantic keeps topping it off. And Zorgel asks the one question nobody else had seriously asked. What if we just stopped that? What if you built a dam straight across the Strait of Gibraltar, cut off the Atlantic's lifeline to the Mediterranean? Without that constant resupply, evaporation would do the rest of the work for free. The sea would simply start dropping. No need to pump out a drop of water, just seal the tap and let the Mediterranean sun do the rest, year after year, decade after decade. In 1929, Zorgel puts the idea into print for the first time. By 1932, he's branded it with the name history remembers, Atlantropa, a fusion of Atlantic and Europe, a brand new supercontinent stitched together out of Europe and Africa. And the scale of what he proposes next is, frankly, unhinged. The centerpiece is the Gibraltar Dam, over 20 miles long, taller than anything ever built by human hands, spanning the strait between Spain and Morocco. Zorgel calculates it could generate as much as 50,000 megawatts of hydroelectric power, enough, by some estimates, to supply more than 8 million homes, making it instantly the largest power station on Earth, dwarfing anything else under construction anywhere in the world at the time. But Gibraltar is just the beginning. A second dam goes up at the Dardanelles, sealing off the Black Sea's contribution and linking Europe to Asia Minor by road and rail. A third spans the Strait of Sicily, physically welding Italy to Tunisia. Far to the south, Zorgel proposes damming the Congo River itself, flooding a vast stretch of Central Africa to create an artificial inland sea, refilling Lake Chad and irrigating the Sahara Desert into farmland. He even sketches an extension of the Suez Canal to keep a shipping route open to the Red Sea once the water starts falling. When it's all finished, and Zorgal openly admits this would take well over a century to complete. The eastern Mediterranean basin would drop by as much as 200 meters. The western basin would fall by around 100. In total, more than 660,000 square kilometers of brand new land would rise out of the sea. For comparison, that's larger than the entire land area of France. New coastlines, new cities, new farmland stretching from the Adriatic to North Africa. Bridges of dry land where ferries used to cross, a new continent, in the most literal sense, bolted directly onto the side of the old one. And Zorgal sells this not as some mad fantasy, but as the rational solution to everything wrong with Europe. His pitch boils down to 3 words that became the title of one of his own books: power, land, bread. Unlimited clean hydroelectric energy forever. Hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of new farmland to feed a hungry continent. Decades of construction work to put millions of unemployed Europeans back on a payroll. And, this is the part Zorgal cared about most, a project so enormous that it could only be built through decades of cooperation between rival European nations. Build something this big together, he argued, and you make another European war practically impossible. He called himself a pacifist, and in his mind, Atlantropa wasn't a weapon. It was an anti-war machine made of concrete and electricity. For a while, the public ate it up. Newspapers across Germany ran lavish, illustrated spreads of the imaginary Gibraltar Dam. A pulp novel imagined an engineer named Maurus single-handedly draining the sea against the schemes of foreign saboteurs. Zorgal founded the Atlantropa Institute, gathering architects, engineers, and financial backers under one roof, and spent the rest of his life, literally the rest of his life, crisscrossing Europe giving lectures, writing books, and lobbying anyone who would listen. But here's where the story turns uncomfortable. Because buried underneath the engineering optimism was something far uglier. Zorgal didn't just want to merge Europe and Africa as equal partners. He explicitly imagined a new world order carved into 3 competing blocks: the Americas, a rising Asia, and his own Atlantropa, with Europe firmly in charge and Africa reduced to a warehouse of land and raw materials for European use. He wrote about flooding the Congo Basin and submerging most of Chad with barely a passing thought for the people who already lived there. One of his own books shipped with a printed quote from Adolf Hitler on the very first page, presented as proof that the project aligned neatly with the ideology of the time. It's a brutal reminder that even a pacifist utopian vision, built in the 1930s, could be soaked in the colonial and racial thinking of its era. And yet, almost unbelievably, even the Nazi regime wasn't interested. Hitler's government looked at Atlantropa and shrugged it off as impractical fantasy. The Weimar government before it had never moved past polite interest either. Zorgal kept fighting for his vision through the entire Second World War and into the 1950s, watching his life's work get rebranded, repitched, and repeatedly ignored by people with the actual power to build it. After the war, there's one last flicker of hope. Western governments, looking to strengthen ties with African colonies and worried about the spread of Soviet influence, briefly dust off the old Atlantropa blueprints. For a moment, it even gets floated at the United Nations. But the moment doesn't last. Nuclear power arrives as the shiny new symbol of limitless energy, making Zorgal's hydroelectric dream suddenly look slow and old-fashioned by comparison. Decolonization sweeps across Africa, gutting the entire neo-colonial logic the project was built on. And Europe, busy rebuilding from rubble, simply doesn't have the stomach or the unity for a 100-year construction project spanning 2 continents and dozens of governments. Hermann Zorgal died in the car accident on Christmas Day, 1952, having spent his entire adult life promoting a sea that was never drained. The Atlantropa Institute limped on without him for a few more years before quietly closing its doors around 1960. No dam, no new continent, just thousands of pages of calculations, maps, and increasingly desperate lectures gathering dust in a Munich archive. So here's the question that should be keeping you up at night. What would actually have happened if they'd built it? Zorgel himself ran the numbers, and some of them are genuinely staggering. Pulling that much water out of the Mediterranean wouldn't just disappear. It would raise sea levels elsewhere on the planet by close to a meter, swallowing low-lying coastlines everywhere else in the world to make room for Zorgel's new farmland. Cutting off the Atlantic's inflow would have left the remaining Mediterranean water dramatically saltier, almost certainly collapsing marine ecosystems across the entire sea. Choking off that exchange of water could have disrupted ocean currents that influenced the Gulf Stream, the same current that keeps Western Europe far warmer than its latitude has any right to be. And in one of the more jaw-dropping footnotes in this entire story, Zorgel calculated that shifting that much mass off one part of the Earth's crust could very slightly tilt the planet's axis of rotation. Most of these consequences barely came up in public discussions at the time. Zorgel himself treated some of them less as warnings and more as side benefits. Atlantropa never got built, but it never quite died either. Echoes of it keep surfacing in the strangest places. Philip K. Dick borrowed the idea for an alternate history Nazi superstate in The Man in the High Castle, later adapted for television by Amazon. Gene Roddenberry's own novelization of the first Star Trek movie casually mentions a Gibraltar dam that's turned the Mediterranean into a giant freshwater lake. Engineers today still occasionally revisit a much smaller, much saner version of the Gibraltar Dam idea, not to drain the sea, but as a flexible barrier that could help protect the Mediterranean coastline from rising sea levels caused by climate change. The wheel, it seems, has come full circle. The same strait once imagined as a tool for lowering the ocean is now being studied as a shield against an ocean that's rising. If this kind of humans tried to physically rebuild the planet engineering madness is your thing, you are going to want to go watch our video on the attempt to raise the Titanic from the ocean floor right after this one. Same scale of ambition, same century of false starts, completely different ocean. And if you haven't already, our construction playlist is full of projects exactly like this one. Ideas so big they reshaped, or nearly reshaped, the world we live in. Atlantropa is, in the end, a story about the seduction of scale. About how a big enough idea, dressed up in the language of progress and peace, can attract genuine believers for an entire generation, while quietly carrying assumptions about who that progress was actually for. Zorgel wasn't building a monument to cooperation. He was sketching a blueprint for a hierarchy, with Europe on top, dressed in the architecture of a shared future. The dam was never the dangerous part. The thinking behind it was. If you made it this far, you clearly love a deep dive into the projects that almost changed the world. So do us a favor. Smash that like button, drop a comment telling us which other what-if mega project you want us to cover next, and if you haven't already, subscribe. We're constantly digging through history's archive of unbuilt blueprints and forgotten plans just like this one, and you do not want to miss the next one.